Hello, and welcome to another Spotlight of Science, where we get to meet the brilliant researchers that ADA funds in our mission to prevent and cure diabetes and improve the lives of all people affected by diabetes. So, my name is Marlon Pragnell, and I'm ADA's Vice President of Research and Science. And we're thrilled to be speaking today with Dr. Ebony Boyce Carter. Dr. Carter is known for her research involving community based interventions to promote health equity for pregnant women and their babies. She's the director of the Division of Clinical Research at the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. And her research focuses on evidence based methods to optimize management of medical complications in pregnancy and translating knowledge of adverse pregnancy outcomes into risk reduction strategies for future cardiovascular disease. Dr. Carter is the recipient of the 2019 Pathway Accelerator Award. This is one of the most prestigious awards that the ADA funds, just to the top most brilliant researchers whose work really potentially has the possibility to move the needle for people with diabetes, living with diabetes. So welcome, Dr. Carter. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell us a bit about your work? We know you're doing a clinical trial. How you got to this point? What area you're focused on?
Sure. So I feel like I actually came to diabetes through kind of like the back door because there was a trial that caught my attention in 2007 by Jeanette Ikovics and her colleagues at Yale, and they had randomized about 1,000 patients to either get their prenatal care in a group with other patients of around the same gestational age or to get individual care. And in that trial, they found that the patients randomized to group had significantly better pregnancy outcomes. So like a 1/3 risk reduction in preterm birth, which was amazing. But then when they did the subgroup analysis of patients who were Black, they found that that risk reduction was even higher. It was 45%. So initially you erased the disparity that was there through this trial. And it's not a medication, it's a group intervention. So that caught my attention. And I was really intrigued with group care from that point forward because it was the only intervention that seemed to meaningfully change things that I had seen up to that point. But to be in those group interventions, and usually you have to be a low risk patients because those are usually done by midwives, nurse practitioners. Well, at the time I read this paper, I was a high risk obstetric fellow. So I wasn't going to take care of low risk patients. So I wondered, can those same tenets that are benefiting patients that are low risk apply to patients who are high risk? And if you think about all of the high risk conditions and who I was taking care of the most, diabetes. Like, can you think of a better kind of existence proof that maybe this might work? It's kind of like the Weight Watchers principle, right? Like you put people together and give them tools and see how it goes. And so as a fellow here at WashU, I really wanted to see if we could do group care for women with gestational diabetes to see if we could improve outcomes. Now, there was no diabetes curriculum, so there was like nothing to use necessarily. I met a colleague, Sarah Mazzoni, who was at Denver Health at the time, who published an abstract, and she was doing diabetes group care there. So she was kind. She let me fly to Denver. She showed me what she was doing. She shared her curriculum with me. And then there was also a colleague who was at Indiana University who was Megan Schellinger, who was doing similar work and shared her stuff. So I give them full credit for helping me kind of get my start in this area. And so I, in our diabetes clinic, found 6 patients. The thing is, I set out to do GDM. So many of our patients already had type 2 diabetes that I didn't have enough patients who had GDM. So out of kind of necessity, we opened it up to GDM and type 2. So I found 6 patients and basically said, I don't know what I'm doing, spirit of full disclosure, but I think that if we do your care in a group setting instead of like our individual care, I think outcomes might be better. But do you mind experimenting with me, trying it out, and tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like? And so we to this day, I think that might still be my favorite group that I've ever done because we learned and we laughed and we had a good time together. And so I kind of adapted the curricula that I had been given, and we did this group session, and it was amazing because one of the patients in that early group had 22 comorbidities. I'm not exaggerating, like 22
Wow.
legitimate things
Wow.
on her problem list. And when I had gone to like, learn how to do facilitation, I took our diabetes nurse with me, Miss Nellie. Miss Nellie like was like my mom. She had probably been in that clinic since like the year I was born. Everybody had respect for her. Like Miss Nellie could kind of tell you off with a smile, and the patients would be like, "Yes, Miss Nellie, like I understand," because it was done in love, like just like this deep and abiding love and commitment to the clinic. So I was told, and I told her this story, so I'm not telling anything else. Like I was told, if you want to do diabetes group care, you better get Miss Nellie's buy-in because she's not the manager of the clinic, but she kind of is managing the clinic. So if she's not on board with what you want to do, it's not going to happen. So she flew with me. We did the training together. She ended up being the biggest advocate for this program. And so for that first group, she was like, "This patient needs to be in there, Ebony." And I was like, "No, ma'am, she has 22 problems. Like I can't handle that in a group." And she was like, "She really needs it. Like, just please let her be in the group." So I very reluctantly had this patient who was extremely depressed, never said anything. Just, I mean, I couldn't reach her, like never brought her blood sugar logs to clinic, like nothing. So she's in this group too. Do you know she ended up being the group care poster child? Like it turns out that she had a lot of things going on in her life that were hard and traumatic and no support. And so the same patient who I couldn't reach in the back at the individual care, you put her in group and she just opened up. I mean, I might be a little bit dramatic, but it felt like it was changing her life. I mean, I saw a different person there. The same people who never brought their logs to individual care clinic brought their logs to group because it's like positive peer pressure at its best. Everybody else comes prepared. You're going to come prepared too. The patient with GDM who needs to start insulin, and I'm like, you really need insulin, like the control. I'm not doing it. I'm scared of needles. I'm not doing it. Well, the patient with type 2 who's had it for 5 years, it's like, girl, it's not that big of a deal. Look, this is what I do, and these are the tricks. And so, even though I didn't set out to have GDM and type 2 together, it ended up being this beautiful like exchange and support in ways that it doesn't matter if I'm saying it as their clinician, the patient saying it make a huge difference. So it was so much fun. We had fun. We did yoga. We didn't know how to do yoga. Like, I mean, I brought in a person who like knew how to do yoga who was helping us, but we had a great time. And they, after each group, told me what they liked, what they didn't like, what needed to be changed. And so we kind of built this together. And so those like that was the very early work. That work led to a pilot randomized trial where we randomized patients to get diabetes group care or regular care. I did it with my, buddy out at Denver Health, Sarah Mazzoni. My patient population here, largely Black low-income patients. Her patient population there, largely undocumented Spanish-speaking patients. And so in that trial, we published and I hope there's trainees who are listening to this too, because when you do research, you don't always know what you're doing. Sometimes you mess up. Our primary outcome was diabetes self-care activities. That seemed like a really good primary outcome for this kind of trial. And it wasn't. It wasn't at all because what happened is, and I think this is again patients wanting to like everybody wants to do well. Like everybody wants to try to do what they're supposed to do. When we would say, so like out of that last 7 days, how many days did you exercise or follow this diet or take your medication? Everybody was like, all of them. Like everybody said they did great. It wasn't true, but if you looked at it, there was no difference between individual care and the group. Like everybody did great if you did it by diabetes self-care. But when we looked at some of the more objective measures, so for example, if you had GDM, did you come back to your 6-week postpartum visit? And when you came back to that visit, did you get your glucose tolerance test for screening to see if you actually had type 2 diabetes? In our clinic population, only 20% of patients with GDM actually get that test. And that's extremely important because we know they're at much higher risk for a host of adverse outcomes going forward: type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. I mean, the list keeps going. But if you don't know, you have lost that key period. And so it was beautiful because 80% of our patients with GDM who were randomized to group came back. And I really think it was that cautionary tale of patients with type 2 really teaching, supporting, helping them. So based on that, we actually applied. By this point, I'm faculty. We applied for a K-23 and a Robert Wood Johnson Harold Amos Award to actually do this definitive trial to see if we can improve glycemic control for patients randomized to group. In the midst of that, and now I'm getting to the ADA part, it started to feel like, is the horse already out the barn? Like, by the time you have GDM and you're randomized to group, like we have a few weeks. I think we try to make a difference. I think we're doing some good, but like it starts before then. Um, and that's really how the ADA Pathway to Stop Diabetes Award was born. So the idea was, if we take patients who are at high risk for getting gestational diabetes, and back in the first trimester, when people are really motivated to make lifestyle changes and do the best that they can to try to have a healthy pregnancy, could we do a lifestyle intervention from the beginning and in that way prevent some of the adverse sequela that happen with GDM and pregnancy? And so, I want to provocatively say, can we stop GDM? Pathway to stop diabetes. I don't know. Probably not. But even if we can't, can we reduce the sequela that are associated with it? And that was really the pathway question. So over the course of a year, with a transdisciplinary team, designed this lifestyle intervention based on lots of things that had already been published and our experience with diabetes. And now we talk about things like, what does it mean to eat for two and to move for two, right? Because it's not like I'm pregnant, I can eat whatever I want to eat right now. So we're really doing a lifestyle intervention starting in the first trimester and going forward to see, can we stop gestational diabetes, and even if we can't, can we reduce the bad things that happen to moms birthing people, babies, because of it? Now the pandemic came along, so we started this trial January of 2020. It was great. We enrolled 37 people between January, February of 2020, and then March 17th, all clinical research operations at our institution were shut down with the pandemic. And then we have had fits and starts, right? We restarted, surge, restarted, surge. So it has been a challenge, to say the least, to keep it going. We are up and running and things are going well now. So happy to report that. But I don't actually have any results to report to you yet, thanks to the pandemic. But what I've been working on in the meantime are metas. What do you do when a pandemic shuts down your pathway award and what you're trying to do? So we've actually worked on a couple of metas, one on diabetes group care that I'm actively working on now, that is showing some of those early things that we saw here when you pull the other studies that are looking at diabetes group care. Yeah, there's some interesting
Yeah.
findings that are going to come. So that's coming soon. And then the other meta, which is going to be coming out in obstetrics and gynecology in um, I think it should be like probably the November or December edition of the Green Journal, is actually looking at one versus two step screening for GDM. And is it worth it? Is it worth doubling the number of patients that you diagnose with GDM? Does that actually result in improved neonatal outcomes? Does it result in improved maternal outcomes? And so we did a meta analysis that includes like 25,000 people in randomized trials, like 710,000 patients in observational trials, and it attempts to answer that question.
Mm,
That's kind of
mm.
what we've been doing in the
Yeah.
meantime while everything's been on hold.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen, through the pandemic, a lot of research was put on hold. I mean, across the whole world was impacted by the COVID pandemic, and we saw, everybody had to pivot to kind of patient care and focus and less on the research, and so that's to be expected. So, but it's exciting that you're back and the trial is going. But it's amazing how much this group interaction has, that the effect of that and the power that has to kind of affect change and behavioral change. How there's a lot of talk about telemedicine and kind of virtual engagement and so on. How does that? Can you replicate some of that, all of it? No, how is that something you could do? Because I mean, imagine people living far away. People can't travel, things to access care. So, any
Yeah.
thoughts there about
So
future?
we have tried, and I want to say we have tried under like crisis circumstances, right? Not like at this methodical rollout or anything. It was kind of like crisis, what do we do? What I have found is for the groups that were already established. So the first group is often awkward because people are like shy, nervous, don't want people in their business, don't know how much to share, don't have trust. And so, group one is awkward. Group two is a little bit better. By group three, four, they're friends. Like you don't even have to have an icebreaker because folks are just like talking and it's fine. But it takes a while to get to that point. if you convert to telemedicine after that group cohesion has happened, it's okay. It's not optimal. You lose some of that X factor that you get in person, but you can do it because people will log in and engage because they want to see their friends. So that's fine. But what we have basically, I'm just going to be blunt. We have completely failed with launching de novo groups online because there's no relationship, there's like no trust. And so, we'll recruit people and have like six people who say they're going to log in and do it, and then like one person shows up for it. The other thing is in terms of like HIPAA compliance and platform. I don't know about other institutions, but one of the key tenets is we do kind of a focused 3 to 5 minute, individual visit in the context of the group to find out what's happening with the patient, to review their blood sugars, to listen to their baby's heartbeat, to do all of those things. Um, and the group platform for our institution, it's just a room. Like there's no like break off rooms or whatever else. And so it's like you do the group and then afterwards have to try to track down each patient and call them to do the individual component of the visit. So I will be honest and say that I don't think that we have successfully made the transition to recreating the magic that we have
Right.
in person, to like the online platform, short of groups that just finished off online.
Yeah, yeah. So it seems the in-person interaction is so valuable, at least for the first interaction to break the ice, to engage, and so on. So
I think so. And I think the other thing, in particular for gestational diabetes, is it's like we drop a ton of bricks on people. They go from like enjoying pregnancy and everything's wonderful to suddenly it's like, okay, check your blood sugar like multiple times a day and then eat this, don't eat this, and come visit us. And you need to like come for a non-stress test for the baby twice a week. And like it's just all of this stuff that feels
yeah,
overwhelming. Oh, and by the way, all this bad stuff can happen. So it's a difficult time, but I like to function in the hope, right? Like,
yeah,
yes, there is the possibility of all of these bad things can happen. That's the bad news. But the good news is that there are things that we can do to support. There are
yes,
medications that didn't exist 100
yeah,
years ago. And so a bad outcome is not a foregone conclusion.
yeah,
We
yeah.
can do better than that.
It's so preventable. So much is preventable. I wonder that what one challenge I'm hearing is this level of screening is so low. People don't not aware and screening. Why is that? How do you think? What are ways that we can actually increase the level of screening and people being more aware of risks and opportunities to kind of prevent?
Yeah. So, for pregnancy, for the 24 to 28 week recommended screening window, we're actually pretty good. Like
Oh,
in that window, I think everybody, I mean, unless the patient is just like, nope, not doing it, like I think we get everybody then. Where we fall short, and I think that there's controversy in the literature about this, is early screening. So we actually looked at our early screening numbers. And, for early screening, what you're really trying to get is people who probably have type 2 and just didn't know it. Like that's who we should be doing the early screening for. In my patient population, basically everybody qualifies for it. I mean, the level of overweight, obesity, and an additional risk factor is really high. And when we looked at our numbers, we were only screening 20% of the patients who qualified for early screening. Now, some of my colleagues who I respect a great deal would say we should not be doing early screening in pregnancy because it hasn't been demonstrated to improve outcomes. I don't think that's true, my personal opinion, because the studies that were done to look at that, people weren't coming into care early enough. You're like, by the time they do their early screen, when they initiated care at 16 weeks pregnancy, they're 19 weeks. And versus I would have diagnosed her at 24 if she had gotten the screening at the regular time. I would argue that was not early. Like that wasn't enough time to do anything. I think until we have trials where we're doing early screening, capturing people between 6 and 8 weeks, and then treating them accordingly, I actually think the verdict is out in terms
yeah.
of whether early screening has utility or not. And the American College of OBGYN still says to do it. So we're definitely doing it for everyone.
Yeah, but there must be beyond screening, like it must be some other risk factors that would predispose people to be like more environmental, socioeconomic factors and so on that probably kind of would factor into that kind of screening, would it? Or is the screening just purely on a kind of a blood glucose kind of that
Yeah.
kind of level?
So we screen based on risk factors. Like so for the normal second trimester screen, universal, everybody gets it. Early screening, we do it based on risk factors. But we actually published a study in Women's Health in the spring of this year that was kind of interesting. We looked at the area deprivation index of our patients. The patients I care for predominantly are in our public insurance clinics. So the vast majority have no insurance or have Medicaid. And we looked, so it's a universally like low income patient population for the most part. And we looked to see people who were um, low income but living in less deprived zip codes versus, so for people in St. Louis, right? Like Clayton is kind of like the really nice, ritzy suburb that's closest to us. So, like, are you poor, but you're lucky enough to live in Clayton? Or are you poor and you live in the zip codes where our preterm birth rates are 18% and they're completely deprived?
Hmm.
Does that matter for how you
Yeah,
come into
yeah, yeah,
pregnancy? And it does. So if you look at and so this is just type 2 diabetes patients. If you look, the A1Cs were significantly worse for the people who lived in the highly deprived neighborhoods. And what you saw over time is you start off with this delta, right? So let's just say the A1Cs are 9 in the most deprived neighborhood, and maybe they're 7.5 in the least deprived neighborhoods, right? Still not good. Um, by the end of pregnancy, we essentially close that gap, not completely, but we get them much closer to where they need to be. So the A1Cs are more like 6.5 is kind of where we're living by the
yeah,
end. But once again, I go back to my initial tenet. It's too little, too late. If we are not thinking about these issues until a patient is pregnant, we have missed the mark. Like good diabetes care in pregnancy happens long before you ever
yeah.
pregnancy.
And then also too, also the first few months of pregnancy are so critical for fetal development. Like avoiding any congenital malformations and so on, things like that. That's probably, I understand that's more the initial stages of pregnancy where you really want to have good control to avoid risk of any of that.
Well, and I had a patient who I really advocated for Medicaid expansion in my state. I live in Missouri, and I told this story. I got permission from the patient, told her story, but I had a patient with type 1 who was essentially living on regular insulin from Walmart because she had no insurance, she had no money, no resources. And I mean, so you can imagine how well she controlled she was with regular insulin from Walmart.
Hmm.
And comes into pregnancy with an A1C of 14. What does that mean? Right? Like the risk of congenital
Huge,
malformations
huge,
in that fetus are astronomical at that
huge.
point. Completely preventable if she had
Mm.
just, I mean, she was doing the best she could with what she
Wow. And
had.
she was using
What
insulin.
she had
Wow.
was
Oh,
inadequate. Those are the kind of things that are, I mean, it's preventable. Um,
yeah,
it felt like we had like failed her as a system,
yeah, yeah. There's so much to do,
for
so
sure.
much to do to kind of, you know, get the word out, but also to research, focus to try to identify areas to improve screening, to kind of, ensure that women are well controlled leading into pregnancy, even planning pregnancy or even unplanned pregnancy, but that when they, even from the very beginning and from conception, they have good levels of control.
Yeah, and I
It's so
think
important.
the other part of that is that postpartum care is often pre-pregnancy care, right? Like before the next
Yeah.
pregnancy. And so the fact that I mean, I think that was like the greatest hope for me of the group care. The fact that we can increase the number of patients coming in for that screening postpartum 3 to 4 fold is amazing. And what does that mean for the future? And the meta that's going to come out in a few months that we're publishing, it essentially okay, I'm in the United States. I know that we're biased here. It
Mhm.
definitely favors the two-step testing that we do in the United States based on the outcomes that you see. But I think the question that is not answered is what about long-term outcomes? Is it actually beneficial to double the number of patients with GDM? If I don't think it is in pregnancy, like I'm sharing that, but
Mhm.
long term, do we actually improve long term outcomes for those patients? We don't know. And my meta analysis doesn't actually answer that question.
Yeah, yeah,
But I think it's a missed opportunity. Like there are so many things that we could be doing that we're not doing for these patients because we know that they're much higher risk.
yeah. And also too, that I think I hear this guy, thoughts around, risk for the child too, like, children born to mothers who have diabetes do have a risk of developing type 2 or obesity later in life. So, this, what you do, the work you do has so much relevance and impact for the whole family and for the future of all, the children that are born to mothers with diabetes.
Yes, totally.
This is fascinating work you're doing. It's such a pleasure to chat with you, and we look really happy now that now that the pandemic is for the most part behind us. You know that your this trial is back up and running, and we'll get to see this kind of the value of this group interaction to kind of really reinforce and facilitate behavior change and better glucose control and self care. And so that's really very exciting.
Well, and I want to say thank you. I am so grateful to the American Diabetes Association for funding this work, for being super supportive, even when the pandemic was like shutting it down. The investment of the Pathway program uh, really has been career changing, life changing. And on behalf of my entire research group, we are so grateful.
Thank you so much. The work you do is amazing, and women's health, pregnancy, healthy babies, uh, high priority, absolute high priority for the American Diabetes Association. So, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.